Okay, welcome to the second of the workshops of the day. I'm going to introduce Chris, who's come over from Germany, and you represent Alpha Whips, and he's going to introduce us to what you can do with single tail whips. So please, anyone who has a problem with noise, will we get much cracking in here?
Not particularly loud. I'm not going to bother too much about showy loud stuff.
Excellent. I leave it all over to you then.
I'm not blasting anyone's eardrums off today. So, welcome to what is essentially just a cut-down version of what I call bullwhip theory, otherwise known as bullwhip basics. I'm going to be trying to teach you and explain differences between certain types of whips at the beginning, how to maintain them, different types of materials that whips can come in, personal preferences, how they play a role in what whips you choose if you don't already have one, how they behave in your hand, and then how to perform three main, very basic techniques of using a whip, and how to work with increasing your own skill with them on your own at home. With a lack of, well, not lack so much, but with not so many whip tutors that can do like one-to-one tuition for such a large number of people, it can be quite handy to be able to practice with these things on your own. So, a quick rundown of three main types of whips that you'll often come across. The first is a snake whip. Now, snake whips will usually come in leather or nylon, some other fancy materials we come across as well, Dacron, for example. Now, a snake whip is usually a weighted whip, and it uses its weight in order to deliver its energy into the cracker. Now, a snake whip has a flexible handle, of whatever pattern the maker will use, and the snake whip will flow directly from the handle. And so it's using its weight as you're projecting it with your hand forwards. Unlike a bullwhip, which you're using a combination of leverage and weight, which I'll explain in a moment. So it's moving right off my hand, right there. Just a little pop. Snake whips are generally made in the form of a thong, which is the braided portion, the main braided portion of the whip. It moves into what is often called a four, which either takes the form of a braided portion on the end of the whip, or more commonly a strip that's tied on with what's called a four hitch. And that strip is usually interchangeable. The braided in portions, usually they're just repaired if they get destroyed. Quite hard to do so. They usually will have either a loop on the end for changing the cracker, or on some common leather whips, just point at the end of the fall, it's just a strip on which you just tie the cracker on the end. So that's a common snake whip. The slight variation on a snake whip is a signal whip, which physically looks about the same, but will often have a very short point, and sometimes a braided in cracker, permanently braided in cracker onto the end. If you're going for a signal, usually if you have lots of confined space, then you'll want to try to find one that's got a loop on the end so you can change the crackers, which is important. I'll explain that again when we get off the whips and onto maintenance. So that is the snake and a signal. Bullwhip is sort of like a mixture between a snake whip and a stock whip. They deliver their energy into the cracker by a mixture of leverage and weight. So the same motion is possible. It's just a short 3-foot whip, so it's a bit more snappy. Like that. And because of the handle, you can do some more fancy routines. Let's not destroy the place. Such as that. The handle gives you lots of extra control, and you can do a lot more with it. Bullwhips will always have a rigid handle, and they are measured from the pommel, just like a snake whip, to where the full section will begin. In this case, 3 feet. The last one was 4 feet. Then you have a fall again. In this case, just a twisted nylon fall. Cracker loop, cracker. When you're looking at whips, this is pretty much all types. If you're looking at a 3-foot whip, the quoted length is just the braided portion. It doesn't usually include the fall of the cracker. That's known as the total reach. So that is a bullwhip. The last and less common, especially in the use of BDSM, is the stock whip. More Australian performers kind of whip, often used outdoors. They're quite long, they're light, and they work entirely off of leverage. This one's too long to throw inside, so I'm not even going to try and destroy the place with it. But as an example, it's one of my personal performing whips. It's a 5-foot stock whip. It does not include the handle section, nor does it include the fall. So the braided 5-foot portion is actually that section there. The total reach is a lot longer. And these are commonly used for two-handed rhythmic performance routines, target work, and such like. They're not usually used for BDSM, but they absolutely can be. But they're worth learning. They take a bit more to learn, more practice to learn on than with a bullwhip, because they're so different. That section there is completely flexible. The thong is attached on by a series of 2 loops, known as a keeper. And it's completely flexible. It's completely off of leverage. So to do a flick, it's a very quick snapping wrist action at the end of the motion to get it to go off. Having already swung the whip back behind you, snap, snap, snap. They're very different to bull whips and snake whips. There's a general rundown of the kind of whips that you usually come across. Leather and nylon. Personal choice, practicality, and just personal choice, preferences. How does it feel in your hand? How durable is it? It's all a personal choice as to which material you go for. Nylon, you generally won't need to worry about maintaining it. You don't need to worry so much about bashing it around. You can use it in just about any weather, especially outdoors. Leather feels much nicer in the hand. Sometimes performs better, and it's just a lot nicer to have. Really, the differences between the two, for me personally, are not that huge. But for leather, quite easy to look after them. A bit of something, Packard's leather dressing or Reniper dressing, or some sort of non-oil-based dressing, once every few months over the lash, and once every few weeks if you use a lot over the fall. If you have a leather fall, don't let it dry out. That's the main thing. Just don't let it dry out. Keep it nice and moist, not too moist, just enough so that it can freely move around without snapping. And bear in mind that if you use it a lot, the fall will wear out, sometimes shorten down a little bit, which is perfectly fine. Let it shorten down a little bit, snip a little bit off if it starts to wear out. Once you get down to a certain point, snip it off, get a new one replaced by the whip maker. Now, the 3 main techniques. The most common one I always start off is what I just tend to call point and shoot, or the archer's throw. It's got lots of different names. You're just taking one end of the whip in one hand, usually your lead hand, and the other end, the other hand, and hold it flat. Not down, not up. Just nice and flat. Target's in front of you. And swing the whip forwards, release this hand, and at the same time, push the handle forwards. The shorter the whip, the faster that motion is. Slow it right down, and have it roll nice and straight. Just like that. This works very well with snake whips because you're using the weight purely, and it works nicely with bull whips. Nice little snap on the handle as you're extending, just push the handle out. I'm going to need you for this one.
I want to do the same thing and then restart. So they get the sideways.
That's a good point. Just there, nice and straight. Let it roll out and pop it. Just like that. That's a really good one to learn. And at home, to practice that, if you have an old pillowcase lying around or a piece of scrap leather or anything like that, you can just close it into any of your doors, let it hang, start too far away, and then slowly start moving forward until it starts to slightly move, where you're essentially tapping it with just the very tip of the cracker. When you're using them on people, it's always best to avoid striking with the floor. That does quite a lot more physical damage than the cracker. And over time, usually doesn't deliver any more sensation. I mean, if you want to just get it too close, just wail into them, if that's your thing, not a big problem. But generally speaking, the cracker is usually the best one. Generally the tip. Do a lot less physical damage without losing any of the sensation. So that is the, okay, next one. This one is the cattleman's crack. We're swinging the whip up and down. So up and down, like that. Very common. And the very good thing about that technique is as the cracker is coming down, it's cracking quite some distance away before it's making contact with the person you're using it on. So as it's cracking, if you're doing it nice and quickly, it's going over 700 miles an hour. By the point it's making contact, it's slowed down well below 300 miles an hour. So you can continuously do this with very little physical damage. And then to hit harder, you just need to speed it up. So how best to explain this? It's two motions. You're swinging the whip up, which is the important thing is to swing it up so it's fully extended, so that when you're bringing it down, the wave is already starting tight from behind you. If you're bringing it up too slow, so don't do it, muscle memory is probably mess with it. It's not going to go off very well. What it is. My muscle memory is really not letting me just screw it up.
Show without fucking up.
One thing that I commonly see people do when they're first learning is kind of doing a snap there and a snap in front. Sort of like that. That's not what you want. There's two things that can be a bit risky with that. First, it can smash into you, and more dangerously, it can hit your eye. If you introduce the same direction of travel with your hand as you're coming up, you're telling the whip to essentially go through you. That's not fun. So out to the side, keep the plane of movement there. It's well away from you. It's not going to hit you. And you can slightly angle the handle away from you so that the thong passes your hand. That's a common problem I see with this move, this technique as well. It will pass your hand and it won't strike you. So you can just a gentle hop there. As it's coming up, it's fully extended. And when it's behind me, I'm reversing the direction of the handle and down, up, down, up, down. That one takes quite a bit of practice to get used to. And there are some videos on YouTube. It's just called the Cattleman's Crack that you can actually use. You can refer back to them, and if you're having trouble, practice and watch them. And the last one, that's too long for here. It's the sidearm flick. But what I'll do is I'll show you the forward flick first, and then how you can turn it into the sidearm flick. Forward flick is a variation of this throw, where you're not using your other hand, but instead swinging the whip behind you. This is good for longer whips. Swing it back, and then guiding it forward. Back, and then forward. There. Nice little pop. Now this one, on people, is nice because you can just tickle them. And then when you want to turn up the heat, put a little snap in the handle. Just a little snap. There. This one is a little difficult. Not so much. It's a little harder than the Cattleman's Crack is. Just to train that muscle memory, bringing the whip back behind you, and then pushing it forward. What you can then do is change the plane on which that's moving. sideways. Like that. Nice little pop sideways. Sometimes called the East Coast Swing, I think. I can't remember what it was called. It's got lots of different names. That's a pop sideways. Now this one is commonly used for things like body wraps. So if you want. Slightly to the left. Just like that. Now this one, this technique, if it's done correctly, doesn't hurt very much. So as you're coming up, bring the whip up and really give it a good pop behind. If it doesn't crack, it hits harder. And around here, you want to avoid that. Because that's not fun. Kidney bashing isn't fun. So, it's up. Yeah, you can sit down now. So it's up, just like the forward flick, the sidearm flick. Just like that. And once you start mastering that, you can follow through. And lead into lots of different techniques. What else to explain now? Just like that. Quick snap, the handle, and down. What else to explain?
Do you want me to chuck a couple of bits in?
Yeah, sure.
One of the things I would highly recommend before you get yourself a whip, get yourself a pair of safety glasses.
Sound advice. Absolutely sound advice. Yes, yes.
It really fucking hurts when you crack one in your eye.
Yeah.
You only want to do it the once. Okay? And then you will literally, I see why everyone does safety glasses. And it's the advantage of wearing glasses.
Yeah.
Because you're naturally in that position. If you're not a glasses wearer, trust me, safety goggles, doesn't matter how ridiculous you think you look, it's the way to start off.
I was going to ask, what would you say the order that you've actually shown us ways to crack and such? Would you say that was the best way to learn them?
I would suggest so, yeah. The point and shoot, this, whatever its name is, it's got so many different names. I'll just call it the archer's throw for the sake of simplicity. This technique here is the easiest one, and it's also the one I first started out with. And the good thing about it is it's actually very easy to practice it and actually get the cracker to strike exactly where you want it to go. And as you practice that one, a little bit of a tip that I can actually give you as you're doing that is that you'll sometimes find that as the cracker is rolling out, it goes up as it's popping and then down. So you'll see that as the whip's rolling out, it's going, if I'm coming straight towards you, it's going straight, but as it's actually popping, it's striking a little higher. And if you find that that's happening when you're practicing, again, I would suggest like an old leather sheet or something like that, pillowcase, you can just close it in the door. You'll actually see that if you are just tapping, if you're just close enough to just very gently touch, that you'll find that it likes to veer upwards. And how that translates into a scene is that you can either find that it's coming up too high up here, or striking, if you're going a little, if you're aiming like for the arse or something like that, you're going to be striking, you can sometimes strike here. And to get around that, get used to your whip, the one that you're using, by practicing with it, so you know where it's going to end up going relative to what sort of distance you are from it. So if you're doing a scene and you want to dig in a little deeper, you want to deliver a bit more sharper sensation, you want to move slightly closer, and that sometimes will, again, the cracker will, because you're closer, the cracker's further up before it's finished rolling out, it will be a little high.
To illustrate a point, could you do a couple of normal cracks, you just relax as you normally would, because when you go slow, you can see an effect. And if you just do a couple, and I'll explain to everyone.
At normal speed?
Yeah. So go at normal speed.
Okay.
And then go at slow. Okay. It's a muscle memory. So actually, when you get good at it, to go slow is harder than to do it naturally. And a lot of kink skills fall into this category, where, to be perfectly honest, we are all shit at it on day one. And it's by building up that skill time after time after time do you start doing it automatically. When I give rope workshops, there's something that I do that literally, to do it, I just grab a rope, pick it up, and there's a knot in the rope. For me to actually stop and take people through that step by step and try and do it slowly is painful for me, because it's a muscle memory. It's a natural instinctive thing that I now do automatically without thinking about it. And when you're practicing with a whip, before you hit a person, you have to achieve that level of muscle memory. You have to be at the stage where everything you're doing is flowing automatically and naturally, because the moment you throw an additional thing, a person to hit, the level of complexity, it doesn't double, it exponentially jumps up. So you have to get your skills at the basic level. You've got to be comfortable with you, your whip, what you're doing. You've got to be best friends at beating the teddy bear or the pillow or whatever, and then start introducing it to other people.
There's another with going back to muscle memory, there's actually something that I found incredibly helpful, especially training my left hand, which is by far the worst of the two, is after making a shot on the target, instead of going ahead and making the next shot immediately, but actually stopping, lowering my hands completely, and then bringing them back up completely from scratch. And I find that completely resets the muscle memory locations. And it'll be harder to hit the target between shots. But if you're knocking a target off of like you have a target, take a little piece of sellotape, duct tape, anything that's a bit sticky, make it a little bit less sticky so that as you're stick it to your target, just enough so that it can support its own weight. And then knock it off, and try to knock it off first shot every time. And you'll find that's actually quite difficult. If you're swinging it repeatedly after another, you'll find it's actually easier to knock it off every time than it would be to completely reset everything and fire again.
I was going to say, I was told to use a pin badge and just stick that slightly into the pillow. You can do it that way.
That works too. Just anything that you can knock off. It's not a huge issue as to what it is, but little bits of tape is what I use. Little pin badge works perfectly too.
The trick on the resetting, it also helps that when you get more confident when you're doing it time after time, you're learning that reset technique. Rather than if you go, right, this is great, I can crack it, and look at this, it's amazing, it's absolutely fantastic, but you've got a bad technique, then you learn the bad technique. You don't actually learn the correct procedure each way and each time.
Bad habits.
Yeah.
They boil down to bad habits. And with whip cracking in general, that usually can take the form as well, additionally, in just sticking with one type of whip as well. Usually a strong point, because obviously you're going to be very good at using that one type of whip. But if you're using different types of whips, they're going to feel different enough so that you can't do something with one whip than you can with something else. So if you can do, say, for example, a volley with a bullwhip, you sometimes find that you can't do it with a snake whip, because they're so different, they handle so differently, you're so used to a bullwhip that a snake whip will be harder to use. And generally speaking, it's usually a good idea to learn with both, or just as many as you can really get your hands on. At the same time, to help avoid those kind of bad habits. And another one is to try as best as you can to learn with both hands at the same time. That one is incredibly useful, especially if you ever intend on doing any kind of two-handed routines, even if it's in BDSM with two short whips. Crack with one side, crack with the other. It's one of the easier ways to learn, because you've got one hand that's leading and another hand that's following. At the same time, cracking two at the same time with the cattleman's crack, you've got one hand that's essentially leading at exactly the same time, and the other one's following. But if you're not used to it, you're trying to do one after the other, you find it's tougher. And so I always suggest trying to learn both sides, even if it's just with the same whip. Switch one hand, practice with that side, switch to the other hand, practice with the other. And this involves, so of course my strong side, this one too. This one, I'm very confident with this. I can pretty much take a target out first shot virtually every time. But right now, this side, I can hardly hit a thing. It's that bad. And I always recommend trying to learn with both sides. And you'll find, you probably get quite frustrated when you're trying with your bad side. You're going to get frustrated. Just stop, take a break, carry on. Try and bring that weak side up to the good side. And if you ever find yourself deciding to learn to use two whips, you'll thank yourself for it a lot. Now, whips and hygiene. I want to make sure I cover this. This is incredibly important. Now, I always suggest when I'm teaching anyone to use a whip, not to strike with the body of the whip, especially in any kind of technique that can draw any kind of lymphatic bodily fluids or blood of any kind. Now, the cracker is always the point where you want to make your contact, because that is the section that can be changed. And never use the same cracker on more than one person for exactly that reason. Keep spares. Make spare crackers, keep them with you. Think of it as whip ammo, so to speak. Once you've used it, the scene is over, give the stuff a cracker. That's a good one. Give it to them. Or just get rid of it. Fit the whip with a new one, you're loaded for the next scene. As far as whips and hygiene goes, that's about it. There's really not that much you need to worry about making a whip safe to use on multiple people, with the only exception that you should never use the same cracker on more than one person, and keep the cracker clean as well. So, base point, avoid contact with the ground. Try to keep it off the ground as best you can, especially if you're striking with a sharp motion with the cracker. It's not such a big deal if you're doing something like a body wrap, because the cracker is not sort of digging in, it's just cracking and wrapping around. You won't have any issues with things like that. Big bull whips, outdoors, on the grass, you got this sub standing in front of you, you can quite happily swing the rifle around them, almost regardless of what the state the cracker is in. With the only exception as well, I didn't mention that earlier actually, is keep it free of knots. Keep the cracker free of knots. If you have a knot near the end of the cracker here, it will do far more damage than it would be if the cracker is completely smooth. Much more damage. And you can actually tell in two ways, the most obvious being there's a knot in the cracker. The second is that you get little spots, little sort of red blood spots, that sort of thing on the sub when you're playing with them. And that's always the point where I suggest you stop, change the cracker, carry on.
If you're playing with one sub consistently, how often would you change the cracker?
As a force of habit, every time.
Every time.
Yeah, I like to keep the crackers completely clean. And I always use, it's called D75 high molecular weight polyethylene in the cracker. And as the cracker breaks in, it actually becomes very fluffy and very soft. And this hugely reduces the physical damage it does, with no negative impact on the actual sensation that we're delivering. Lots of crackers can be made out of nylon, sometimes Dacron, sometimes the guts out of the paracord. It's all good to use. And when you're looking at the cracker, you can judge roughly how much physical damage it's going to be doing by looking at how smooth the knot is toward the end there. So the flatter it is, the less probability you're going to have issues with marks, blood and whatnot. All the nasty things you don't really want too much of. If you've got a big knot in there on the cracker, even if it's just in its normal state, you'll find that it will be a little sharper, and you can adjust your technique and force delivery accordingly.
One thing that's always made me laugh over the years, and again, I'll share it so that other people can avoid it. Whips are great. They can be really awesome things to play with. But like everything in life, start small and work up. So if you've suddenly decided next week or last week that you're kinky and you've come to this and you go, oh my God, I have to have a whip, please don't buy something longer than 6 foot. In fact, don't buy something longer than about 2.5 foot, because you have to build up the skills of the shorter ones before you start going up. So you see someone who barrels in and you know that they're relatively new and they pull something out of their bag and it looks like it's been wrapped 6 or 7 times round, probably being bought from Ann Summers, it's probably not going to be very good, and you certainly don't want to be kind of probably within about 7 or 8 foot of them at that stage.
Yeah, if it's 6 foot whip, about 9 feet.
Yeah.
Plus their arm as well.
Because they'll go whoop like that, and not bothering to look behind them to realise that they need so much space and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I've actually had that happen. I went to a gathering once, whipped on the table, random drunk guy picked it up, started swinging it around in a room full of over 100 people. Struck like 6 of them in one go.
Unfortunately, I bet you the 6 of them didn't strike him back.
Yeah, they actually didn't. I was pretty surprised. I was quite surprised. You know, it was a little retribution there. It was quite well earned. But yeah, short whips are a good thing to start on. The only thing to bear in mind with whips that are very short, especially if you're doing moving into outdoor whip cracking, sport cracking, that kind of thing, is that the way that short whips handle and the way that long whips handle are quite different. That is to say that as the whip becomes longer, the motion that you need to do in order to get the whip to do what you want scales with its speed. So a short whip such as a little 3 foot bull whip like this one here is quite quick. If that was a 6 foot whip, people's eardrums would be blowing out of their heads. So it scales with the size of the whip. So that's worth bearing in mind as well. If you're not interested in learning or doing outdoor sport cracking with anything longer than say 4 feet, you won't really have that issue. You know, a 4 foot bull whip is going to handle fairly similarly to a 3 foot bull whip. 4 foot snake whip will handle a little bit similar to again sort of 3 foot bull whip, 2 foot snake whip. We got the handle is acting as a modifier. So if you've got like a 4 foot bull whip, it's got a 12-inch handle. You've essentially got a 3 foot snake whip tied to the end of the stick handle. So that's worth keeping in mind as well.
We have a question. If you want to practice on your own body, what would you suggest is a place to start?
I literally know no way of being able to do that. Self-flagellation with a whip, I've never been able to figure out how to do. The only thing I can think of is if you have a very short whip, you can try to swing it down and do a self-body wrap, but that's really not. I wouldn't recommend it.
The only person I've seen do it is a guy called Alex Cobra. Yeah. So, but do it, but not do it. So he'd stand there, swing it around his head, and go like that, and wrap himself. But if you think about the energy, a whip cracks because you throw the energy down it, and you accelerate the tip beyond the speed of sound. So what you're trying to do is throw energy, a lot of it, away from you, but you want to wrap yourself in it. So actually you can't get the energy to crack and self-wrap. And literally,
I think
one person I've seen be able to do it, and this guy, let's put it this way, when someone in the royal family wanted a whip made, he was the guy that made it.
pretty much, yeah.
One of those. I mean, it's like absolute zenith of his field, and he's the only one I think. Self-cracking. I'm like, I've never seen this done. And then went, oh shit! Alex used to do it at the end of one of his stage shows, where he'd swing around above his head and just wrap it around his body. And I think he got
I know
to the
what
stage.
you mean. Is cracking the whip down that way and then letting it lead around you, and as it's coming around, you can actually come out of it as the whip's coming out, and it's already preloaded.
Oh, I've seen him do that, but I've actually seen him crack it and let go of the handle so that it actually wrapped itself around like a belt. I mean, not on a regular basis, but when he was on top form, he could do
It's
it.
a variation of exactly that technique. If the whip's say 6 feet or longer, you can, again, it's just cracking, usually with sidearm flick is good, because you're leading into a motion that wraps around you, it's going to swing around you, it's going to grab onto you, and you can essentially just let go. But what I usually do when I'm doing that is actually keep hold of it, and then lead into more following routines. But yeah, I know what you mean. That's a lot of fun to do that. But yeah, to answer your question, it's not very practical on yourself. It's for whips. With floggers, much easier, probably super easy. But with whips, not so much. Better to have a partner of some sort.
So even with like the shortest 2-foot whip, you couldn't like try and practice your technique on your arm.
You wouldn't, even if you would be able to hit yourself with it at that length, but you wouldn't really be gaining any real skill with it. You wouldn't be able to apply that to what you're doing with yourself to using as with a play partner. The two motions are too different to each other.
Again, you're going like that and throwing this way, and you want to be throwing that way.
Or you just play someone right.
I mean, maybe a few insights because I'm in the process of learning. What helped me is what you described with just a slap flatter or whatever, and the little crumbled up duct tape, or even some without the duct tape. That's for accuracy once you're there. But just crack it. So you're at the first, you're sure you're not hitting it. You're sure you're too far away, and then very gradually move in, and then you get kind of a feeling for what's the distance I'm actually covering with this whip. And once you've got that down, and very important, always reset. Always, don't do one or maybe two cracks, and then just put everything down for just a second. It really doesn't need more than just lowering your arms, making a step to the side, go back to the position you think is the right one, and then you'll gradually know it. Just again, it's just your body. It's not stop thinking. And then with the moving in, and then the next thing is the actual accuracy with targets, and that's the stage I'm at. Because you basically told me, once you get that duct tape of 10 times in a row with the first throw, then I'll let you do it on person. And not quite yet. But if you're scared of I will hurt someone because I haven't practiced on myself, it's a much longer process. I would suggest heavily that it's a much longer process to actually get there, to actually use it on people. It's well worth it if you've ever been on the receiving end. But don't worry too much about hurting someone, because if you get to that level of accuracy, you have quite a good idea of how it feels. Ideally, if you've never been hit with a whip, find someone who has the accuracy and the precision and all that, so you know what you're causing. But be aware. This is like, I've been at it half a year now, so I've had other things to learn too, so maybe my attention was diverted, but you won't go up to him, buy one now, and hit someone next week.
I would say
you can, but it's not going to end good.
Realistically, if you're looking at hitting anyone in the first year, you probably need to stop and think, am I actually doing this correctly? Because it's not like it's a soft rabbit fur flogger, okay? You'd literally have to be traveling in a maglev train to be able to cause damage impacting someone with that, because you've got to have that much energy behind you. These, they have the energy. They will do the damage, and therefore you need to be more respectful of getting to that skill level before you want to have the fun stuff.
A phrase that I've always taught with Urush and everyone else I've always taught how to crack a whip is to respect it as a dangerous thing. They can be extremely dangerous. And when you're starting out with them, it is absolutely a good idea to move slowly, get a feel of how it moves. And then later, start getting it to pop, and then go from there. So then you get an idea of exactly what the thing's doing, what it's going to do when you put various different types of movements into it.
And one more thing, I don't know if it's just my problem, but I'm guessing it's many people's problem. It has nothing to do with strength or you know, you want to butcher or crack the whip. That's not how it works. It's literally just it's literally just flick.
It's a technique.
If it's not working the way you want, try and put less energy to it. And don't look at Instagram at all the whip masters. I mean, some of them are obviously good, but you see so many that are just not naming names here.
Yeah,
basically doing all the strength, and all they do is crack it on the floor. Because another thing is, the moment when you get the forward motion, the thing should be exactly opposite from where you want to hit. So if it's up there, you're going to hit the floor. If it's just behind here,
it's going to come out forwards. That actually leads me on to a good point as well. There's something about leather whips and caring for them. Also with nylon as well, but more so with leather whips, is never practice on concrete. Never ever practice on concrete. Because if that whip is going to strike the ground after you've hit it, you are going to do serious damage to it in a nanosecond. Enough damage to need to send the thing back for hundreds of pounds worth of recreating and repairs. It is incredibly difficult and incredibly expensive to repair whips that have been destroyed. I only know that because I've spent a total of somewhere around a month repairing whips that have had just this type of damage. It is incredibly time consuming to do so. Nylon whips as well, it's very much the same thing. Yes, they can take a lot more beating, but they absolutely are not indestructible. Especially some nylon whips that have things like specialized braided falls and things like that. Those are very accurate, they deliver the energy very cleanly, at the caveat that they're not indestructible. A normal nylon whip, like this sort of thing here, twisted nylon falls, all the same material, they're great for beginners. They're quite robust, you pretty much can't destroy it. Even if you did bash it on the ground, it would take you a long time. But if it was something else with a fancy braided fall, or it was a bit longer, or had any specialized components in it, you really can do serious damage to it. And 9 times out of 10, that item that you're holding is quite expensive.
Would you recommend using and learning nylon whips before you move to leather then, just so you can get the technique so you don't damage it?
Generally speaking, yes. I would usually suggest so. I mean, I actually didn't follow that path. I learned on a leather whip and destroyed one in the process. But generally speaking, that's a pretty good idea. Even more so with like a 3 or 4 foot bull whip, because they sit so nicely in the medium of how whips handle. They can do generally more than what other whips usually would do. Like a snake whip, for example, is more difficult to do sort of fancy volleys, that sort of thing.
Also, the economic input as well. A nylon whip, not that expensive. Leather whip, well, I've bought cheaper cars.
Yeah, they literally run between £100 way up to 2,000.
Yep.
It all scales with how long it takes the person to make said whip, and this varies enormously. Some whips can take 4.5, 5 hours to make. I've spent 2 weeks working on some others. 2 solid weeks working on a single project. They vary enormously, and they should be looked after, irrespective of what material it's made out of. Because generally speaking, whip makers, most of their cost is time. With nylon whip makers, it's almost all time. You know, it takes a long time to make a nylon whip. In some cases, a 6 foot kangaroo bull whip. I know people that can make 2 of them in a day. It's impossible for me to make a nylon whip in that speed. It's completely impossible because of the way they're built internally. But they have higher material costs, much higher material costs. 6 foot bull whip between 1 and 2 full kangaroo skins. which usually run you about £200 each.
And also, in the sex shop, you will see those £50 leather doves.
How do you know you got a good whip?
You didn't buy it on the high street.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
I'm from somewhere reputable, but like if you're buying second hand, for example, and
That's a
someone
good
says it to
question.
you,
Yeah,
like
very good
I've always been curious about that because they are really expensive, and you know, I have one of yours. I spent a lot of time saving for it.
What's the quality of the strap?
Long period of time. It's going to take you ages to practice with it, but then when you get to the skill level, you're going to have it for a long time. So it should be an object that you pick up and it speaks to you, because it's a tool in exactly the same way as people playing sports. You're going to start off with basic kit, but if you end up in the top 2% in the country, then you're probably looking at carbon fiber gear and highly optimized stuff. But actually, the reality is on day one, you don't necessarily need that. So always pick it up and go, is this something that I could comfortably use in my hands for 120 hours? And if you're going, no, it doesn't feel right, put it down, move to the next one. Because you're going to be using it for that long, so it's got to be comfortable and exactly what you want. And in answer to finding good stuff, you buy an item like a bullwhip on the high street, it's probably going to cost you 50 quid. It's going to be shit. But actually, you're not going to be able to speak to the assistant and ask them questions. Or if you pick it up and go, hey, this is really great, but black and red, I want blue and black. So
It's another biannual, actually. It's just very common in the whip-making community as a whole, which actually is, rather than it being a bunch of opposing businesses, it's largely a single unit community. They usually suggest if you cannot talk directly to the whip maker, it's a bad sign. Some way you should be able to contact the maker of the whip directly.
I'm going to go one stage further because I have to deal with a lot of these complaints. You really want to be able to stand in front of the whip maker, or
That's even more helpful.
or have their contact available on a regular basis, because there's about £400 worth of debts that I've bought off people where the whip maker has ghosted on them, has gone quiet, isn't speaking to them. A couple of the whip makers, they're not necessarily nice people. It suits me to have large sums of money that they owe me, because that way they're kind of kept underground. Because if they pop up and they start trading somewhere, I'll turn up and say, I've got all these IOUs from your customers. Can I have the money, please?
Yeah, whip makers that do that kind of thing tend not to last long. Many of them